For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term land grab. It's fairly common in India, where you have criminals or groups of people, sometimes even corporates, that move in and occupy land illegally, dispose of it again illegally, or use it for various nefarious purposes. Now, what happens if this land grab happens not here, but on the moon? That's the subject of our discussion today, lunar land grab. And I have with me Chaitanya Giri. You've met him on our show before. He's our go-to man on space issues. Chaitanya, welcome. Glad to have you on this, I'm sure, interesting show.
Thank you, Suryaji. Happy to be back on Just.
So, Chaitanya, lunar land grab,
Yeah.
when we were talking earlier, you said this is a possibility, a real possibility. How does it work? How is it happening?
Firstly, I must state that one of the finest decisions of the current world order has been to denote the Arctic, the Antarctic, the Moon, and other celestial bodies as global commons, as common heritage of humankind. And it was important to do so because when the treaties, the Outer Space Treaty, the Antarctic Treaty, were formulated back in the 1960s, a select group of countries had already started developing competencies to reach there and have semi-permanent presence there. Now, things started to change in 2010s. So, in the last decade, uh, around the same time when a Martian dream, the dream to go to Mars, was being sold by celebrated space entrepreneurs, and the dream was sold at really low prices. So the
Hmm.
cost of going into space was dropping quite substantially. In the Around the same time in 2013, the U.S. Congress saw a bill being tabled, and the name of the bill was the Apollo Lunar Landing Legacy Act. Uh, this bill was presented by a Democrat senator. Her name is Donna Edwards, and she represented the Prince George County, which is just northeast of Washington, D.C., the very same county that houses NASA's biggest space research center, Goddard. Uh, so, what did the bill propose? Uh, what she tried to say was that all the sites where Apollo spacecraft had landed on the moon, they be deemed as national parks. And
My God.
these national parks on the moon would be jointly managed by the administrator of NASA and Secretary of Interior. So, just like our Home
Mhm.
Minister. So the bill stated that these two entities would vet and grant access to American as well as non-American agencies and entities to go into the regions where these Apollo landing sites are located. Now, Apollo missions were not in singulars. They were as much as 6 to 7 missions. Each of them have contributed to hundreds of kilograms of artifacts or
Yeah,
Apollo era spacecraft, and these
artifacts.
are all littered on the moon in various sites. That includes a buggy on which on American astronauts had traversed on the surface. This includes the landers. This includes a lot of, including poop. So even poop is an artifact. So when that happened in 2013, almost no country batted an eyelid, uh, and there was no precedence of having a national park on a
Hmm.
celestial body, on a body which is considered as a global common.
Hmm.
So, if we go by a logic, up until now, since 1961, when the Antarctic Treaty came into being, does any country have a national park in Antarctica?
Hmm.
The answer is no.
Hmm.
Can any country declare the land on which an Antarctic station is located. Let's say we have Bharti, we had Maitri and Dakshin
Yeah.
Gangotri. We never deemed those locations as national parks. They were offered to us, or we set up bases because setting bases there was logistically possible. It was possible to house our scientists to live there, and it was of scientific interest. So this Apollo Lunar Landing Legacy Act, quite a long name and a tongue twister, has not seen the day of the light yet, as many, even in the US, found it to be too vulnerable to scrutiny because the aspect of deeming a real estate as national park was considered as contentious internationally. However, 7 years later, in December 2020, when the world was busy managing the COVID-19 global pandemic, a similar legislation was again passed in the US Congress, and this one became an act. Uh, this legislation is called as One Small Step to Protect Human Heritage in Space Act.
My God.
This act legalizes NASA's recommendation, which it had made in 2011 to spacefaring entities. And the recommendations were on how to protect and preserve the historic and scientific value of US government lunar artifacts. So, not
Mm-hmm.
only Apollo era artifacts, but all the missions that have flown to the moon since then and have littered on the moon, to be precise. So no more national parks. That that redundancy or the vulnerability to scrutiny has been corrected, but this time it's artifacts. And the US now wants to create restrictions for entities who wish to visit and touch these US origin artifacts present on the moon, and the powers to prohibit has been given to NASA administrator. So US Secretary of Interior is no more in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the US and its junior partners who are together clubbing to go to the moon under the Artemis Accords, it is by far understandable that only space companies of these countries or
Yeah.
agencies or any entities compliant with the accords will be able to go to these sites and touch these items or touch these artifacts or displace them. China, Russia, and even other NATO partners like France that have not signed the Artemis Accords may not get the permissions
Mm-hmm.
to touch them. In short, this is squatting on the moon through artifacts.
So, by that analogy, we also have crash landed some spacecraft on the moon some years ago.
Hmm.
By that analogy, we can also claim that area as an artifact or as a historical whatever.
Yeah, yeah. See, now that this 2020 Act on lunar artifacts has been legislated, it's highly unlikely that the legislation can or will be reversed because it's
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
difficult in the US
Mm.
Congress. In that case, a precedence has been set now. So every country would now want to control the few square meters. I won't say square kilometers, but the few square meters of real estate on the moon over which it has artifacts littered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is nothing but exploitation of loopholes in the Outer Space Treaty, which clearly states no ownership on the moon. Uh, and the US legislation has created national rules and rules for handling and managing artifacts. So it is very likely that other countries, especially US's competitors, Russia and China, would follow suit, and they'll
Yeah.
set up similar, legislations in their own countries.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for China to do that. It just has to mention it in the state party Congress, and same is the case in Russia. Uh, and by the same yardstick, as you just mentioned, India too can claim the Moon Impact Probe, which went along Chandrayaan 1 in
Yeah.
2008. So Moon Impact Probe is lying on the surface, as well as the Vikram lander, which was
True.
part
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the 2019 Chandrayaan 2 mission. Both
Yeah.
can be considered as artifacts, and India can create likewise barriers for any entity to go and touch them.
Mm-hmm.
But how are
So,
we? But how are we going to keep checks and balances there? How would we know if anybody has gone there and touched it?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are the secondary questions that are arising. And before getting into any tit for tat mode, we must also ask questions here: that is it sustainable to squat on the moon like this in the name of
Mm,
artifacts? If this
yeah,
practice goes unchecked, there will be entities who will litter on the moon deliberately and call that litter as its own artifacts.
yeah.
Such
Mm,
littering will cause damage to the natural realms on the moon, which are of great scientific interest. And there is a need to initiate dialogue on this.
mhm.
I don't
So,
think that dialogue will ever happen because of the geopolitical acrimonies that are developing.
yeah. Mm. So, where is this going, Chaitanya? Where is it all leading to? Are we looking at some kind of a confrontation at some future date on the moon?
Uh, there won't be confrontation, but people will, or countries will try to check each other's capabilities to confront or to surveil or reconnaissance over its own assets. Firstly, what's the scientific value in having these artifacts? Number one, like for instance, many of the artifacts are made up of metals, and these
Yeah.
metals have been lying there on the moon, exposed to cosmic radiation, solar radiation, exposed to microgravity. So we would want to check these materials and metals for what has happened to them over the span
Mm,
of 50, 60 years now.
yeah.
It's of great interest to material scientists. So there is value in this. I won't say that it's a completely a nefarious act, but uh, there are limits to it. We should set a deadline of how long should an artifact lie on the moon,
Mm,
and who would do that? It will have to come up with international consensus. And as more and more countries join the bandwagon of going to the moon, this thing will have to come up ASAP. So I
mhm,
don't think that there will be any confrontation as such, but there will be a lot of debate, a lot of you know, heated exchanges happening, and those heated exchanges should happen in the interest of humanity and
mhm.
our interest, common interest on the moon.
Mhm. It's interesting. I was reading this MIT review, online the other day, and there was a reference to some of the areas on the moon that would be of interest to countries like the US. One is the area where there is perpetual sunlight, usually the rims of craters, and the other where there is a constant availability of water, which would be craters.
Mhm.
The depth of the craters themselves. And there's nothing to stop perhaps a corporate or some group or even a government backed agency to plant one of their, maybe a solar power thing over there, and then say, well, as long as this thing is something that we put up, it's ours. And if it's next to a area where there is a crater with perhaps ice, then it becomes also by extension their own property. I mean, this is
Yeah,
also possible.
yeah, it's quite possible. See, like you just said, the moon has several zones like these: zones of perpetual darkness, zones that are perpetually lit by sunlight,
Yeah.
and most of the sunlit side of the moon is vital for solar energy harvesting, for both robotic operations as well as for human presence on the moon. Uh, if you look at all the Apollo, Luna, Russian Luna, Chinese Chang'e, as well as Chandrayaan landing sites, they are all on the sunlit side of the moon. Uh,
Mhm.
and remote sensing studies have, time and again shown us their well-being. So even today, Chandrayaan, there were a few images that were released by ISRO some days ago, where Chandrayaan could capture images of the Apollo landers, and this went viral on social media. So there is interest there, as well as in the past 10 years or so, space agencies from all over the world are interested in going to the dark side of the moon as well as to the poles of the moon. Now, that is
Mhm.
where, as you just said, there are several craters, especially in the region known as Aitken Basin, which is on the South Pole. In this Aitken Basin, there are massive craters filled with ices of water, ice of carbon dioxide, ice of nitrogen. And all
Mhm.
these ices are of great commercial interest because, let's say, with water ice, You can split the water molecule. You can convert the hydrogen from the water molecule into a fuel. You can use the oxygen for human habitation and life support system, as well as you can use the same water ice for water consumption whenever the astronauts go there and live there for long durations. So any real estate along such sunlit as well as perpetual darkness zones will be of great value, and that is where most of the, let's say, Changa sites on the dark side of the moon, those will eventually be claimed if we don't have this dialogue, a
Yeah.
consensus
Yeah.
on litter, on squatting, or on artifacts. And there's another issue. The presence of perpetual darkness in these craters uh, has over billions of years have developed ices as well as organic molecules, and most of these organic molecules could be of interest to studies on origin of life on earth as well as of
Mhm.
astrobiological interest. There could be certain patches on the moon which could support native life that is native to the moon. So these
Yeah.
are these are immense treasure troves of knowledge that can be tapped only if good exploration practices are maintained. I won't I won't bet on human or manned spaceflight or manned presence as good exploration practices, because many of these astrobiology missions demand really pristine operating conditions, and
Yeah.
pristine operating conditions are only possible through robots and not through humans, because
Mm.
we are full of microorganisms ourselves, and we might contaminate these pristine zones that are of
Mhm.
immense scientific value. So care should be taken. There needs to be consensus on deeming certain zones on the moon as scientifically sensitive regions, as no-go zones for humans, where
Mhm.
only a certain kind or certain class of robots can go and do the exploration. And there is a need for norms, because in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll be going as frequently to the moon as we go to our vacations.
So, in this race, to do you see any signs that, okay, let's leave that aside for the moment. As an you provide some advice and consultancy to the government agencies also that deal with space. Are they aware of these issues that are coming up? Are they following them? What is the reaction you get from them?
Uh, I tend to speak on issues related to astrobiology, because I'm an astrobiologist by training. So one major issue that we need to develop norms for is planetary protection, of how to prevent forward contamination of celestial bodies. By that I mean how not to contaminate celestial bodies with organisms that we carry advertently or inadvertently from Earth, and
Mhm.
how to prevent any backward contamination where you are carrying microorganisms that are native to the moon, or microorganisms that have lived on the moon for very long, mutated there because of exposure to radiation, non-earthly conditions, if I may call
Mhm.
it, and how not to bring them back. So that is something that needs to be kicked in, not only in India but also world over, because uh, in the coming years, it's not only space agencies that will be going there. There are several companies that are wanting to set up some kind of infrastructure on the moon. Like for instance, Nokia, the telecom company, is is planning to set up 4G telecom connectivity on the surface of the moon. Okay,
I see.
there are automotive companies like General Motors, Toyota, Suzuki, Daimler Benz, who are very much interested in building rovers that can carry humans, and these rovers for surface transportation on the moon. So a lot of commercial interest lies there, and a huge sums of money are being pumped in. Like for instance, the American space economy is about to earn somewhere to the tune of 42 to 50 billion dollars just from commercial space activities on the surface of the moon.
Oh
And
my
in
gosh.
in this decade, there will be as many as 7 to 8 private space missions led by or facilitated by NASA, which will be only carried out by private companies. So we need to bring these private companies into the ambits of international consensus. These companies might follow American legislations, but they'll also have
Yeah.
to follow the dynamic international consensus that are needed now.
So, would you say that our decision to bring in private companies into the Indian space business is timely?
We are slightly late.
We always are late.
We're slightly late to catch the bus, but we've caught the bus. We caught the bus. We caught a running bus now.
So, where do we go? When you faced with this kind of developments that are happening, where do we go with this? I mean, what do we do?
See, I'll be very clear here. Most of our private space companies are only focusing on Earth-oriented applications.
Uh-huh.
So if they are building satellites, they are only building satellites for uh, telecom connectivity here on Earth. They are only building satellites for remote sensing of Earth. Most of the launch vehicles, private launch vehicle companies are only catering to Earth oriented applications. We yet do not have companies that are fully focusing on lunar or Martian exploration. uh, it will come with time, but it shouldn't I mean, we shouldn't be late to start thinking about it. We can start thinking about it even today, and execution might be deferred to a later date at some point in this decade. But we should start thinking on those lines because, like I said, 40 to 50 billion dollars in the initial
Yeah, my
in the
God.
initial decade. We must
Mm.
then start extrapolating how much are we going to how much revenue are we going to generate, let's say in the 2040s or in the 2050s. So to prepare for the next 30,
Yeah.
40 years, we'll have to start preparing now. And we'll also have to stop thinking in brackets of 5 years. Space demands thinking on decadal levels. We'll have to
Yeah.
create decadal strategies. And these strategies must come from the top office, the Prime Minister's office, who looks after space affairs.
And is it your sense that we are moving in the direction, however slowly?
Yeah, we are slowly moving in that direction, and many of these developments continue to inspire a lot of Indians, a lot of NRIs. We continue to serve many of these lunar bound space companies, and it is of great importance for us to tap into the talent that is working on this cutting edge and bring them back and accommodate them in India's space ecosystem, private space ecosystem. Because a country that is supposed to become the second or the third largest economy on the planet cannot, ignore this massive domain of lunar exploration,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we cannot stay aloof from developing consensuses or developing international norms and upkeeping them.
Tough call. Well, I hope we're on the job. Last question, Chaitanya. Um, I recall you sent me a WhatsApp message about some kind of a patrol, apparently, between the Earth and the Moon. Um, I didn't quite get the hang of that. What was that about?
So uh, there's money in going to the moon. There's massive amounts of money.
Yeah.
There are competitors. So just like the Americans uh, and their cohort have a plan to go together, the same way the Chinese and the Russians are planning to go to the moon. And when large sums of money or large sums of profits are involved, you need to secure them. And that's why
Yeah.
what the Americans have done is the American US Space Force has set up something known as the Cislunar Patrol Highway. So they want to monitor the orbital paths or the path that takes spacecraft from Earth's orbit to the lunar orbit. And this is the foundation of Earth Moon connectivity. So, just like as we speak about BRI, or
Hmm.
as we speak about, let's say, the Asia Africa Growth Corridor or the Northern Sea route, there is a new route that is being cultivated or curated, and that's the cis lunar connectivity route. And being the world leader in space, the Americans are taking the initiative of setting up a patrol that will be managed by US Space Force, and it will monitor all kinds of activities that are happening in this domain or in this space.
My God, fascinating. This is like science fiction, but it's not fiction anymore.
It's
It's
not fiction
happening.
anymore. It's happening.
Fascinating.
It will be to our loss that if we keep considering it as fiction. It's happening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Chaitanya Giri, fascinating as always talking to you, and I'm sure this is going to come up with more ideas, and I give full credit to the Americans for thinking so far ahead. I mean, like it or
A lot to
not, they
learn
are
from
far
them.
ahead.
Yeah, a lot to learn
Absolutely,
from the
absolutely.
Americans as well as the Chinese. So, a lot to
Yeah,
learn. Yeah.
yeah. Chaitanya, thanks very much. Great talking to you, and pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir.
And for those of you who have joined us on this conversation, thank you for coming forward with your comments and observations. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you and good night.